So far we've been looking at this. Right? We've been looking at what are the basic building blocks of arguments. We've got the concept of claim down. We distinguished claims and issues. We looked at the relationship between some claims, premises, other claims, conclusions, and arguments. We've looked at different types of arguments, what makes them that kind, how do we classify them. Now we're actually going to hit on something else. So up until this point, we've really been concerned with this connection, right? And I've gotten you to the point where you recognize something that you do sort of unconsciously, but now you can do it in a conscious way. That when you want to make a claim that somebody else doesn't accept, what do you have to do? You have to provide some reasons, some support. And this is what you do in fact do. And other people do this as well. You know, we should have democracy. Why? Well, that's an open question. There's other ways we could run our political system, and other people have done that. Not every place is a democracy. Why should we have it? Well, you give some reasons. Now, I brought up the idea that maybe some of these reasons might be controversial. People might not accept those, right? So then you'd have to provide further reasons. But there could be another problem at this point, too. Where do claims come from? Where does the information that is in the claims, where does it come from? This is a multi-answer question. So think about where you get your information from that you then reason to conclusions. How did you know you should go to college?
People tell me.
Okay, so one source of claims is this broad category of people. What kind of people?
Intellectual people.
Parents, intellectual people, people who may have already gone to college themselves. People that haven't gone to college? Why might they say you should go to college?
To better yourself.
Yeah, they'll say, you don't want this job, go to college. My sister went to college because, let's see, she would have been about 33, 34 when she made the realization that she did not want to be a bartender her whole life. You know, because that's fun when you're in your 20s and you're, you know, pouring drinks for people and meeting people and all that. And actually, she worked in a bar, a very high-class pool hall where the Green Bay Packers would come. So she had a pretty good time. But after a while, you get sick of the same jokes, the same drunks, the same, you know. And she decided she needed to go to college. And I'm sure somebody told her, hey, you need to go to college if you don't want to have this sort of job.
A lot of times life changes can push you in that direction. Kids
Yeah.
get your priorities together too.
Okay, those are good examples too. Kids are an example, having a kid is an example of a life change that, if you're a good parent, now it doesn't do this for everybody, but if you're a good parent, it radically restructures your priorities. You're no longer able to do all the things that you were inclined to do before. You now have somebody who's totally dependent on you. Quite often longer than you'd wish. You'd think that by the time that they get to be 12, they should have acquired certain independence, and they have. You know, and then when they're 18, they should be more independent than they are. And some kids are, some others aren't. Now that's an interesting one too, though. Notice what that came from. Personal experience. There are some things that we can write about and you can read about and put yourself imaginatively into those cases. But until you've actually experienced them, it's difficult for it to hit home. For instance, well, here's a great example. They have done some studies, and I don't remember exactly what the timeline of these were, and they were dealing with voting Democrat or voting Republican. And they found that college students, while they were in college, they tended to be pretty heavily pro-democratic. Not surprising, because most of their professors are Democrats in most institutions. There are some institutions that are pretty conservative. Like if you went to Bob Jones University, I don't think you're going to find any Democrat professors. But in most places, yeah. And you know, if you think about where do the Democrats usually stand on taxes and redistribution of wealth and things like that, the Democrats are for that. Now, if you're in a very low tax bracket, you don't mind that at all. As a matter of fact, things like the earned income credit, those work out very well for you when tax time comes around. As soon as you start making a little bit of money, and you don't have to make much, just a little bit, a lot of that goes away. And what they found is that over time, people who have a college education, and now this doesn't hold for every single election year, but in a lot of cases, they can index having a college degree with the shift from voting Democrat to voting Republican. Why? Well, the Republicans very often are cutting taxes. If you're paying taxes, you're usually for that, right? So that's a matter of experience. You don't actually know what it's like to pay 30% of your income in taxes until you actually go through that. So you might say to yourself, especially if you're not very good with numbers, that's not that bad. Yeah. Those of you who have experienced it, you know it's not quite what it's cracked up to be. And I'm talking in not just federal taxes, but state, Social Security, taxes you pay to register your car, sales taxes, all that sort of stuff. Actually, for some of us, it's closer to 50%.
You ever had a severance package and then they tax it all at once?
No, because I've never had a severance package. I've never gotten paid when I left a job. I wish I had. I've had bonuses, and my bonuses are usually taxed at a 40% rate. When I teach summer classes, 40% rate. Just goes right into taxes.
Yep, and then they tax it again at the end of the year.
No, then I usually get some of that back because they overtax me. Okay, so experience, right? A lot of things are based on personal experience. Who are these people that we're hearing from? Well, you know, some are people we know. There's a lot of information that you're using that you got from people you don't know directly, that you use to make decisions about the world. You may not have done this for the decision to go to college, but you're going to do this for other decisions. Where else do people get information from?
Online, internet,
The internet. What's that?
resources.
Resources. Yeah, you could actually do research. And doing research generally means going to books, peer-reviewed journals, quality information sources. Ask.com is not a quality information source. Wikipedia is not as bad as it used to be. I know a lot of instructors tell you that you should never, ever use Wikipedia. Yeah, you shouldn't use it when you're writing a report. You can use it as a starting point. When it first came out, it was abysmal. That's why instructors had this knee-jerk reaction against Wikipedia, because they're still 10 years in the past. When you could look up an article and find very controversial views put out there as if they're the mainstream, all sorts of inaccuracies, and a lot of nut jobs were writing for Wikipedia. Now that's been more or less weeded out. You still have to kind of watch yourself with some entries, especially those dealing with religion or politics where it gets controversial. Not all sides may be represented. But Wikipedia is not a bad place to start. It certainly beats Ask.com. Ask.com just gives you these tiny little blurbs. Yeah, quality research generally is for you guys is going to involve some sort of connection to the library. Using library resources online or there. But where else do we get a lot of our information? That's not where most of us are getting our information, by doing research.
Entertainment, like
Yeah,
news and everything.
yeah. We call that whole big thing media. Some of it is actually news shows. Now some of those news shows are actually about entertainment, right? See, I don't watch any of these. TMZ, Or some other ones that are about entertainment.
Entertainment tonight.
Entertainment Tonight, E-News, that sort of stuff. There's actually shows out there specifically set up to parody or make fun of those, like The Soup, which used to be Talk Soup. I don't know if that's still on. Yeah, a lot of people get their information from watching the news, or some sort of news, or reading the news, right? Newspapers, going online. A lot of papers are now online. As a matter of fact, newspaper circulation is way, way down for the last 10 years. It's starting to, well, it's starting to die out.
Did you say newspaper?
Yeah.
It's because you can read it online.
Yeah, there's that, and newspapers have print newspapers have a slower turnaround for getting news out.
Yeah.
And you can't leave comments on a piece of paper, which people like to do. Some of them are terrible. You know, if you ever want to see horrible things about Fayetteville State University, look in the Fayetteville Observer, and don't read the article itself. The article may be good, it may be bad. Then scroll down and see what people write in those comments. Some of those will just, curl your hair, because there's some ignorant people out there, and they're quite willing to say things. But other people may read those comments and say, well, I saw it on the internet, so it must be true. And then it goes into their claims and premises. You know what they're doing over at Fayetteville State University? They're burning money. Every once in a while they have a bonfire and get together and just throw state money down the fund, down the tube. People say things along those lines. Some people may believe they're true. Media includes news. It also does include entertainment. Entertainment. And a lot of people get their ideas about how they ought to behave in life from entertainers. What's good, what's bad. Yeah, what's fashionable. So getting fashionable is probably not that bad from a critical thinking perspective. Because remember, fashion is a matter of aesthetics. So nobody's really right, nobody's really wrong. But whether you should be for or against alternative energy sources, whether you should be for or against the war, those sort of big issues, moral issues, celebrities don't really know much. As a matter of fact, most celebrities are pretty stupid. When you actually listen to what they say on talk shows, they'll say things, right? They'll make claims, and then actually, this is where you can apply critical thinking. Listen to whether they even provide any justification for the claim, or whether they just assume everybody knows that X, Y, Z is the case. Then listen to the justifications they provide. Sometimes they're just crazy, disappointingly. The smartest thing I've ever heard a celebrity say was Rob Lowe, and this is when the Iraq War II started. And of course, where were most people in Hollywood on the war? Were they for or against? They were against it, right. And so you would imagine that this guy, Rob Lowe, would probably be against it. And so a reporter got in his face at a restaurant and said, what do you think about the war? Should we be there or shouldn't we be there? And now he was on a show at the time where he was playing a presidential advisor. You guys remember that show, The West Wing? Okay, so he was on that show. Actors have a really bad tendency to think that they actually know something about the lines that they're delivering. Some of them do. Some of them are very smart. Many of the actors are actually not quite so smart, especially about the topics that they're talking about. What Rob Lowe said is, I only play somebody smart enough to answer those questions. I'm not actually smart enough to answer those questions. That's the best thing I've ever heard a celebrity say. Because you know what he did? He was being honest about his limitations. He was saying, hey, before I say anything about this, I would have to get more information. I'm not qualified to make that sort of judgment. That's really smart. Is that what most of the celebrities did? On anything? Whether you should eat meat or go to war or wear fur, or any of these sort of things. They'll sound off. What else do we have? We have something else that shows up on the internet and on TV, on the radio. Advertising, right. I just get mixed up. Is it an S or a Z? Let's be Z. Advertising. We get a lot of information out of advertisements, even though we shouldn't. We're going to talk later on in this section about advertisements. We're actually going to look at some using the video screen and analyze them using the book's categories. Ads are usually making some sort of claim. They are making one basically fundamental claim. What's the most fundamental thing an ad is saying to you? You should. You need this is actually secondary. The ultimate claim is you should buy this product. Why should you buy this product? That's where the need can come in, because you actually need it. And then, how do you know that you need it? Well, just look at this story that we're going to tell you. Think about a beer ad. The way a lot of beer ads work is some guys are sitting around an apartment, they're bored, one of them comes in with a case of pick whatever you want. Suddenly there's a lot of girls there, dancing. One of those disco balls comes down and everybody's having a good time, right? That's why you need that product. It's telling a story, and there's a lot of implicit premises. This could be you. This story that I'm telling here is very much like your life. Those are implicit premises. The advertising industry is making arguments. They're making arguments about what you need, what you ought to have. Fashion is a great example. A lot of women's magazines. Actually, you can buy some women's magazines that consist of nothing but ads, right? I never understood that. I had some friends who would buy these magazines, and I'd say, why are you just buying a magazine full of ads? Well, I want to see what's fashionable. Ultimately, where are they going? I need this. I should wear this. Why should you wear it? Well, because it's in the magazine. It's fashionable. If it's in the magazine, it's fashionable. Therefore, I should go out and buy this. And they're getting that from advertisements. So these are all sources of information. What we're going to look at today is mostly this portion of it. Your book talks about why and when we should be suspicious about claims that people are making, information about us. And it gives you this great example of somebody who got taken in by a phishing scam. You guys are all familiar with these. You've gotten a lot of emails, I'm sure, from Russia or Nigeria or wherever. They're just dying to put money into your bank account, and all you need to do is send them your bank account number, and they will set you up. You guys got these sort of emails?
I get them every day.
Yeah, I get them even on the FSU server. Now, why do people fall prey to that? Well, they're not being critical thinkers. They're not considering claims. There is also greed involved too. Right? You can't be taken in a con unless they have some sort of hook on you. And quite often, the con works by playing off of people's greed. Now, why are people who normally seem pretty smart fooled by these sorts of things? There's certain basic rules that your textbook talks about that you ought to be following when you're handling information and sizing things up. And one of the first ones that he talks about is degrees of credibility. When we talk about credibility, what we mean is being believable. It actually comes from the Latin word that we get credit from, which means, in the beginning, belief. When you have a credit card, you're being extended money because somebody else believes that they will sooner or later get that money back. Credit is good faith. Now, credibility is not an all or nothing thing. It comes in a spectrum. Remember we talked about inductive and deductive. Deductive arguments, 100%. Inductive arguments, it's not 100%, right? the degree of credibility, the degree that you believe in something can vary. And it should be proportioned to what? How you feel? That's a bad judge. That's a bad way of judging, sorry. What should you proportion it to? The evidence that you have. Some evidence bears a lot of weight. Other evidence doesn't. If somebody just down the street comes up to you and starts telling you about how the world is going to end tomorrow, do you believe their claim? No. I mean, you might, in the back of your mind say, well, what if it does happen tomorrow? Do I have everything lined up? Did I call so-and-so and tell them that I love them? But you're not actually going to be making a lot of decisions on that basis. They're not credible. Now, if suddenly we see news reports and all these famous scientists are saying, yeah, folks, there's an asteroid headed towards the Earth. There's nothing we can do about it. You got about 36 hours. Better start putting your affairs in order. A lot of people probably won't believe it, but if it's a whole bunch of famous scientists, experts, right, and there's no reason not to believe them, I would get my affairs in order. Yeah.
You remember when 9/11 first happened and everybody started selling those emergency survival kits because they just thought we were getting ready to go into nuclear war?
Did they do that down here?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was in Carbondale, Illinois when that happened. We didn't have anything like that going on.
It was up in Wisconsin too.
Was it?
Everything. Everything heads and masks and stuff.
Yeah.
How about when 2000 rolled around, everyone thought all...
Yeah, Y2K.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people were very panicked about that. I was actually more worried about what was going to happen if any sort of random event took place with all these people all charged up and expecting the worst. Because I was living in a trailer park where just about everybody was armed.
Was armed?
Yeah. And rounds go through trailers. Even things that a stud would stop, like a shotgun, ball, it'll go right through a trailer. And I was just thinking to myself, oh man, a lot of these people are loonies. This could turn really bad. But it passed without any incident. So you should proportion your belief to the evidence that's available. Now that may mean in some cases you have to say, it's 50-50. I don't really know one way or the other. If that's what the evidence supports, that's the rational thing to do. If you have a 99% certitude about something, and somebody says, well, you're not 100% sure, so you can't make that decision, they are probably trying to manipulate you. Right? If you are reasonably sure about something, then you have good grounds for making a claim and acting on it. Now, if you only have the bare possibility, then you're not justified in acting on it. So that's one rule. Another thing that your book talks about are interested and disinterested parties. And this is a good concept too. What is an interested party?
Person who stands to gain from belief and claim.
Yeah, that's the textbook definition, and I think that's actually a pretty good definition. Sometimes your textbook is so-so. On this, it's actually pretty good. Anybody who stands to gain by you believing a claim. If I'm a salesperson and I want you to get the idea that you ought to buy this product, am I an interested party? Yeah, because if you are holding that belief, then I get my commission. Right? Right now there's an interesting set of demonstrations going on up in Wisconsin, some of you may have been following. And it has to do with, ultimately it started with teachers, the teachers union protesting, and I have friends on both sides of the issue because I come from Wisconsin. And I have friends who are teachers in Wisconsin and other union members in Wisconsin. I have friends who are incensed that their kids are not in school because the teachers are actually not actually on strike, but just demonstrating. And they're having a real problem there. Now, what I'm seeing, this is interesting, on Facebook, is a lot of my out of Wisconsin academic friends immediately took the side of the unions and the teachers. Sort of a knee-jerk response. They didn't have good evidence for doing so. Because actually a lot of the stuff that the teachers are putting out, the protesters are putting out, turns out to be misinformation. Some of the stuff that's on the other side is misinformation too. But people are just sort of repeating this. Now, when you have a dispute like that, and it's about people's paychecks, they're an interested party. What those teachers are really upset about is the fact that they will have to actually pay towards their own retirement. Because right now they don't. The state picks it all up.
I don't see what the big deal is, because everyone else does it.
Well, that's it, yeah. But if you don't realize that, that's not being talked about. If it's instead, like for instance, I have a teacher friend who has been posting lots and lots of things on Facebook, and he said that somebody said, you know, why aren't you in school teaching the kids that you're paid to teach? And he says, I am teaching them. I'm teaching them what democracy looks like. Well, there may be something to that. Actually, I'm going to be writing an essay this week about the different meanings of democracy and how this fits in. But he's not a disinterested party. He would very much like to get everybody to believe his claim. He would also like to have himself believe the claim. Often we talk ourselves into things because, you know, he's actually a good guy, and on other things he would feel bad about not doing his job, the job that he's getting paid to do. So what does he do? He talks himself into thinking, I am doing the right thing. The other people are terrible. They are doing the wrong thing. The real situation is not quite so clear-cut. And I see a lot of my academic colleagues who immediately jumped onto the side of the union. Why? Because the union is for the little guy. The union always protects the workers. Well, if you're a worker and you're not a member of that union, and you are paying taxes to support those teachers, and your kids are not in school, and you have to take off of work so that you can be home with your kids who are supposed to be in school, you're the little guy too, right? You may not be quite so sanguine about, the protest stuff. It's very easy for people outside to, start saying, democracy, we stand with the protesters, because that makes us feel good.
But with a union, you're paying somebody else anyway.
Yeah.
To be part, you're
Yeah, no, this state actually doesn't have that sort of thing. This state actually forbids a lot of union things. It's at the other extreme. Wisconsin is at one extreme. The unions have it pretty easy. This state's at the other extreme. Unions are really, busted here. The main thing I'm trying to get across here, though, is most of the people who are parties to a dispute, they are not disinterested parties. If you want to be a critical thinker, you actually have to go out and check their claims. When you have two sides in a political dispute, or three or four or five, you actually have to do some fact-checking. Because people in general, if they are interested parties, are not going to tell you the whole picture. They're going to tell you what makes their side look good. So you have to be very careful to figure out, when you're presented with some claims, am I being given claims from people who are interested parties? That doesn't mean that their claims are automatically false. But when we talk about proportioning the belief to the evidence, they have to meet a higher bar. They have to show you that they're really giving you the truth, not just their spin. Now, after that, your book talks about other ways in which we judge people's credibility. And it's got a kind of interesting, you see this, it's probably not going to show up on the camera.
You ever been in court and had to testify?
Oh yeah. You notice this is the same guy in these two pictures. One looks like a street bum, the other one looks a little bit like Colonel Sanders. But looks like a fairly reliable guy. Who are people going to trust? The guy who's got the tie. Yeah. Your book talks about a lot of characteristics that affect our assessment of people's credibility. A lot of these characteristics don't have anything to do with whether somebody is really credible or not. For instance, does a person look you in the eye? Con men will look you in the eye and lie to you because they practice doing that. If a person is telling the truth and they're embarrassed about the truth that they're telling you, and they're not experienced in public speaking, they're probably not going to look you in the eye. Somebody like me, if you pose an interesting problem to me that I have to think about, I will break eye contact so I can think about it. So whether somebody is looking you in the eye or not, that doesn't tell you whether somebody is making true or false claims. There's that show some of you may watch, Lie to Me. Did any of you watch that show? You don't want to trust too much that's on that show then. It's an interesting fiction. I like watching it too. But can you take any of those signs and then you yourself start to figure out, oh, that person is feeling guilt? I'd watch it, bless you. I'd watch out for that if I were you. I wouldn't be very prudent. They talk about some other things. Simply being taller, louder, and more assertive can enhance a person's credibility. It's unfortunate. It works out good for me, I'm 6'3", but it's unfortunate from a critical thinking perspective. Simply being taller actually makes a person more credible. That's completely insane, isn't it? Should I be believed over, well, pretty much anybody else in the classroom? Because I don't think anybody else is 6'3". Except maybe, how tall are you, Mr. Weston? 6'2". So Mr. Weston is almost as believable.
My stepmom is 5'2" Guatemalan, and she's going for her doctorate right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing the same thing in class, talking about the same stuff. And the professor, the previous class, had talked to 2 different people, her and someone, I think a little bit taller than me, tall, slender, white woman. And he had them each speak about an argument or something. And at the end, he, talked about which one did you believe more, blah, blah, blah. And even though the white woman's, whatever she was talking about was like way more absurd than hers was, she was the one that was believed over her.
Yeah, things like race, depending on the setting. If you're dealing with people who have any sort of racist tendencies, those will come out in terms of credibility. People who distrust foreigners, that'll come out. And all of this is from a critical thinking perspective, really irrational. Those are not good grounds on which to judge somebody's credibility. You want to judge their credibility by, say, their track record. Or, whether they're an interested or disinterested party. Or whether their argument is absurd or not. Okay? But, why does your book point these out? Well, you and I are all subject, because we're human beings, to these sort of failings. If we know about them, then we can guard against them. Part of being a critical thinker means not having everything completely lined up and you never make a mistake. It's knowing how, when you're on the verge of making a mistake, how to catch yourself. Because you will be making a lot of mistakes in your reasoning. I do myself, but then you have to catch yourself. The non-critical thinker just goes on with it. The critical thinker gets to the edge and then says, oh wow, what's going on here? And then they pull back. That's the real difference. It's not that the critical thinker never makes mistakes or never is on the verge of making mistakes. They just handle issues of credibility better. Now your book also talks about a few other things before it moves on to authorities and the news. And it brings up a couple concepts. And I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. One of these is, this is where our experience often comes in, what we call background knowledge. It has this section, does the claim conflict with our background information? So background information or background knowledge. What else is personal experience? Observation, right? You know that I'm in the classroom right now because you see me in front of you. Let's say you had some doubts. Maybe it's a hologram. Well, you can come up and poke me. Don't do it right now, but you could settle that, right? You could settle that through experience, through personal observation. Are you observing things all the time? No, you actually carry around in your head with you this entire amazing stock of information that puts a computer to shame. All about the world, the way it works, all these things that you've read, heard, said, been told. And you don't realize that you have all this information until you actually make use of it quite often. There's a lot of things. You know how it is sometimes when you get to the test and you're really worried about taking the test and you're thinking, man, I don't know this subject. And then you sit down and suddenly everything starts to click and you find yourself answering things. You say, wow, I actually did know that. Have you had that experience before? Well, that's an experience that you're going through all the time, all day long. But you're not doing it on a test. You're doing it with the world around you. You know, there are certain things, we've talked about this in other classes. If I drop a pen, what's going to happen to it? All of you know it's going to fall, right? Because you have background information about the way gravity works. If I make a claim to you like the textbook has about, if I say there's some baby somewhere who can lift a 300-pound weight, do you find that plausible or implausible? You think it's true? Why not? I mean, you don't know. You haven't seen all the babies. Well, you do know something about babies, though, right? And you do know something about weights and the world. You have background information that you rely on. If a claim conflicts with your background information, you've got good cause for thinking it is probably false. So if some salesman tells you that this car can get 100 miles per gallon, you might want to check that out, right? That should start alarm bells ringing because it's conflicting with what you know about cars in general. I don't even know that, you know, these super high efficient cars that people are touting these days get 100 miles per gallon. That seems pretty high. So yeah, if a claim conflicts with your background information, you want to check it. Now, is your background information always right? Can you think of cases where it could be wrong? What if you have mistaken views about the world that you've gotten through?
Abused children and stuff like that.
Okay, I wasn't thinking of that case, but that's a really good example. I have my mentor abused children. My mentor is both a philosopher and a theologian, and now he's actually retired, and he's a clinical scientist. He's a clinical therapist. He has advanced degrees in all three fields, and he used to bring them all together in classroom discussions. And I remember him talking one time about abused children, and we were talking in philosophical terms about people's understandings of goodness and how they ought to behave towards each other. And what he said that stuck with me. I don't remember the rest of the lecture, but he said that one of the terrible things about abuse is that it distorts the child's understanding of the good. So that, this is why abused children, when they become adults, often become abusers themselves and have a very difficult time forming healthy adult relationships. They sometimes impose it on other people, or they're vulnerable to manipulation. It's because they've gotten some background information like this. I am only good insofar as I can be used by somebody. Or the world is composed of two kinds of people, those who abuse and those who are abused. That can be somebody's background information. And if you have that sort of background information, you're going to have a very hard time forming healthy friendships with people. I mean, think about it. Friendship is more than just using the other person. There's a reciprocity there. But if your background information rules that out, that becomes a very difficult thought to think. One other example that I had in mind, background information that could be wrong. Again, we've used this example many times. Think about stereotyping and racism. When somebody, or any sort of, being biased against this group or that group. Well, let's use racism for an example. If you have, as part of your background information, because everybody around you has been saying this, and you know your parents told you this, and your environment reinforces it, that people of another race are, pick whatever you want, you know, criminals, out to get you, lazy, mean, all those sorts of things, then you're going to be very surprised when they don't act that way. Just to give you an example of how this works. You know, the part of Indiana where my children live is white and Hispanic. There's almost no African Americans. It's rural Indiana. And I don't know where my little girl got this idea. I was driving with her and we were in Winston-Salem and we went to a cafeteria. And she'd never been to a cafeteria restaurant. She really liked that. And Winston-Salem is a very heavy African American population. So we're there, and I didn't quite know what to do in a cafeteria either, so I asked somebody at the table next to me. I don't remember what I asked them about. And then we started a conversation, and they were black, and my daughter was kind of taken aback. And afterwards she said, I was really surprised that they were so friendly. And I said, why? She said, well, I thought they would hate me because I'm white. I said, where did you get that idea from? Well, you know, we enslaved them. And this is all the stuff she's learning at school.
How old is she?
She was a 8-year-old girl. Well, she's being taught in a all-white or Mexican school that black people in general don't like white people because of slavery. Now, is she actually being taught that? Probably not. But that's what she heard somewhere along the line. That's part of her background information. Luckily, new experience, you know, and then meeting people and thinking about it broadened her horizons. Otherwise, imagine going through life thinking that people are going to hate you because of your skin color.